Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Independent Producers Organization Live Showcase. And this is coming to you from Portland, Oregon, the Portland Community Media Studios at 2766 Northeast MLK Boulevard, 1 block north of the Nike factory store. Still need to get that into it to get some picture. We're today our show is about veterans and the suicide situation to do with them. And we've had that before. I don't think we can get enough of it because it's so important. And I'd like to tell you how I found out about your particular thing. I heard this story where he talked about this one veteran was really having a problem and getting ready to do something bad and to himself. And they ended up getting someone from your group to come and talk to him in such a way that he ended up backing off and having the whole situation turn around. And that's how I knew that I wanted to get a hold of you and hear more about what you do, because if you're doing that kind of thing, that's really great. So, by the way, I want to introduce my co-host, Jim Lockhart, first, and then I'll go to our guest, Tom Parker, and with Lines for Life, and you tell us a little bit about your group.
Sure.
And
well, thanks for having me, Richard and Jim. Appreciate it very much.
Oh, welcome.
I work for a nonprofit that's called Lines for Life, LINES, for FOR Life. And we've been around for about 20 years.
oh,
Our mission is to prevent substance abuse and suicide. And we do that several ways. One of the biggest things we do is we operate 24-hour crisis lines that are free and confidential to the people who call us. We have an alcohol and drug line where people can get referrals. We have a suicide line where to de-escalate suicidal situations. As a matter of fact, our folks are very adept at that. They de-escalate about 98% of the calls we get. Folks that are thinking about taking their lives. Yeah, we added the military helpline that you've referred to back in 2010. So we just hit 4 years of operating that. And then we also have a specific one that's dedicated to teens called the Youth Line. And that is hosted, it's a peer-to-peer arrangement where you've got youth that are talking to other youth. Now these are young people, really sharp folks who have taken a lot of training in listening actively and keeping the conversation not focused on them but on the person that they're talking to, help them find solutions. And then beyond that, we also really work strongly to sort of act as a catalyst in the community to get change brought about. For example, in the substances area, there's a giant epidemic with prescription drug abuse and addiction that's going on. So we handle a lot of different areas, and we're centered here in Portland. We're a nonprofit, and we handle about 40,000 phone calls a year. 17,000 of those, roughly, suicide calls. And then we have, de-escalate about 98% of those calls. So it's an amazing thing. I mean, the difference between us and, say, for example, calling 911 is if you were to call 911, they're a dispatch service. I mean, they do a very good job of it, but it comes down to the phone rings, 911, how can I help you? Is it police? Is it fire? Or is it medical?
And they're just a relay point.
Well, yeah, and that's what they're designed to do, and they're designed, and they do a good job of that. But they're not designed to get somebody who's standing on a bridge someplace or has a loaded weapon or other means to prevent that from happening. And there's different degrees when people call us. So I'll get. I don't mean to run away with this, Richard, a little bit here. I was just giving you sort of the background of what we do and where our expertise lies. All the people who work with us are trained at least 60 hours, including 16 hours in ASSIST. That's Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. And that is pretty much the gold standard worldwide of how to deal with folks that are contemplating suicide or having suicidal intent. And that's a lot of commitment from those folks to take that We operate with about 150 volunteers who are all go through the 60 hours of training. We have master's level counselors who supervise them and train them. So it's an amazing combination of the community and the nonprofit working together to help other members of the community.
Well, of course, of course. Go ahead, were you?
Well, there's, I've written down just about, notes of everything that you've been saying here, and it's incredible. You've been doing this for 20 years. And so, say somebody calls up 911. Is that where you get most of your referrals from?
No.
How do people know to call you?
Well, what's going to happen, Jim, is somebody calls 911, they're going to do dispatch. It's, police or medical or fire. We are known for a couple of reasons. We're the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline for all of Oregon, Southwest Washington, Alaska, most day parts in Idaho. And then we also spill over nationally throughout the day. So if somebody calls the toll-free number, for example, today when we're doing this show live the first time and taping it, this is National Suicide Prevention Day. Actually, Worldwide Suicide Prevention Day.
Didn't know that.
On September 10th. It's a shocking fact. If you think about, in Oregon alone, we have 717 deaths from suicide. We had that last year. About 700 a year for the last several years. 90 of those are kids, teenagers, stuff, young people, and a large number of them are vets, which gets back to what you're
Just
talking
what
about.
I was going to ask.
We have, well, you got to think about something. We have, 27% of our, you guys can do the math, but 27%, now that's not my phone, I just like to say that right now.
Oh, well, only rang once there.
Right.
We have 8% of the people in our state who've served and are veterans, therefore, and yet they account for about 27% of our suicides. And that's a very troubling statistic, one of the highest ones we have anywhere in the nation. Nationally, we lose a veteran every 65 minutes to suicide.
In Oregon? Or
Nationally.
Nationally.
Yeah.
But if you had 717, today is also like the 6-month anniversary of the Malaysian airliner going down, disappearing out of nowhere. The hue and the cry about that, which is, shocked us all.
Yeah.
But every year we lose twice that amount of people in Oregon to suicide. And yet it is
That's right.
it is preventable.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk more about that. So I don't want to steer your conversation away from what you want to. But a lot of these things interleave. If it's substance abuse, if it's mental health issues, if it's either suicide when it comes to a civilian or to a vet under different circumstances, they all sort of call back on the same things. And at our lines, the one thing that happens when somebody calls us is they get a very specific, unique experience. There's no cookie cutter answer.
Oh.
We don't drive it down from the shelf, do A, B, C, D, and then you're going to be fine. The first thing we do, for example, on a suicide call is we say, okay, and it's almost counterintuitive, because you'd think, the first thing I think most of us without any training would think to do is say, well, let's not talk about that. Don't do anything bad there. Let's think of something else. That'd be wrong. That'd be whatever the case is. The first thing our people do is say, if you were talking to me and say, Tom, tell me why you want to die.
Oh,
and what's going on? What's
What
happening in your
brought
life?
you here? Yeah.
How did you get here? What's going on? Because a lot of people are ambivalent about living at that point. It's not that they want to die. It's just they've sort of lost their reasons for living. They've lost their grasp on it, partly because mental illness, usually, for example, the case of Robin Williams, where you've got deep depression or something like that, has limited their thinking, their rational thinking for all the good things that they have to live for, and they can't see what those options are. And so what we do is establish a very close relationship in a very intimate setting. Listen carefully. We do not tell anybody what to do. As a matter of fact, once we've exhausted the reasons they're thinking about killing themselves, the next thing we move into is, well, who do you have for support? What's good in your life? Let's talk through that. And sometimes they haven't seen it in a while and they start to see it. But the course of the conversation at that point becomes, again, self-directed by the person on the phone, which is, why don't you develop the safety plan that's going to keep you safe? Let's talk about this. We don't put them on the spot. We talk, is there somebody else you could be talking to? Is there a neighbor, a friend? What about some of the things you used to enjoy? Fishing, I can tell you one story. Again,
Go
I
for
don't
it.
mean to.
Oh, anecdotes are important.
Well,
right.
here was a case where we got a phone call from a guy, and he called, and the crisis line counselor who answered happened to be an Iraq war vet. And this fellow calls, and his plan was to kill himself with his gun when the conversation was over. And so you sit there and you think, well, how would you handle that? And the fact of the matter is that, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, but the guy on our end of the phone said, you know, I'm kind of a big fan of guns myself. What kind is it? Because I've had some. And they got it, honestly, they got in this conversation about, well, it was this kind of gun. Oh, yeah, I know that one. And what's
Something
this?
he's interested in.
Yeah, the mutual thing, and I think that does this and can do that, and hey, how about this? And do you ever enjoy taking it to the shooting range? Yeah, I sure do, and blah, blah, blah. And as they got in this conversation about it, and then they went on, he said, hey, you know, remember, if you decide to take yourself out, you're never going to send one downrange at a shooting range again. There's, you know, that's going to be a pleasure point you're not going to have. And so by the end of the conversation, they'd established enough rapport. And this fellow had thought, well, it had come to the conclusion, yeah, I do have an aunt, I think it was an uncle in this case that I can talk to who's really good about this stuff. I will seek him out and talk to him. But the important thing that happened before the conversation was over, the Iraq War vet who knew this particular gun could hear on the phone, he could hear this guy clearing the clip. There's a very distinctive sound of getting those bullets out of that gun. And so he locked those up and put the gun away elsewhere. And then we asked him with his permission if we could follow up with him. So it's, you know, we use a term like 17,000 phone calls a year, but the fact is those are individual stories.
Describe follow-up.
Sure, okay. Follow-up is shown to be a really good practice, and we do it only with the person's permission. So we get done with this conversation, we say, okay, so, you know, if it was you on the phone, I'd say, well, Richard, you sound like you're in pretty good shape, you know, tonight. It sounds like you got a plan, things are going to work out well. Would you mind if we called you later today? Okay, and how do we get in touch with you? Fine. Or tomorrow morning, whatever is convenient for you. And then maybe 5 days from then, we'd want to get in touch with you again, and 30 days later to follow up.
Okay.
A big part of this is folks have become so isolated, they kind of feel like, wow, somebody actually does give a hang about me. They do care. Somebody's going to at least be following up on me and seeing where I'm at. So just that whole process of talking about it is so important.
Yes.
Which, you know, dovetails again back to this business of it being Suicide Prevention Day. Those of us on the outside that are watching a friend who is definitely in some sort of trouble are always stuck. It's like, what do I say? What do I do? I don't even know where to begin on this thing. We saw a giant spike in phone calls shortly after the Robin Williams suicide.
Which is exactly what I was going to ask
And it
you.
was not a giant spike in phone calls because these people were wanting to kill themselves. It was because they were saying, hey, I've seen this problem with my friend for quite a long time. I need to take some action. I need to reach out, which is part of it too.
They realize how serious it is.
So they call us and say, okay, where can I start this thing? And that's really great for the suicide prevention line, because we can say to you, okay, you know, first thing I want you to do, Jim, is I want you to ask him in no uncertain terms, are you thinking about suicide? There's a myth that goes, if I ask you about it, you're going to suddenly get the idea for the first time. Well, we don't have that much control over other people. If we did, I could say to you, you know, I could say, well, Richard, could you give me the keys to your car, the pink slip while you're at it, would you fill it up with gas, and thank you very much. And you'd laugh me out, and that's your car.
Yeah.
I couldn't get that far with your life. But these people have been thinking about it, and it's almost like lancing a boil, that you have an opportunity to talk at last and relax through this and go, okay, whew, now I can at least get talking because I've been thinking. And there's, you know, behavior patterns that we see beforehand that are warning signs. We can talk about those as well. And that goes across all boundaries, be it with the military, which you were interested in, be it with the youth or average citizen. You know, quite often we see these things, what are called dual diagnosis, where the person is depressed or is suffering some sort of mental health issue, which is no surprise because a quarter of the U.S. population deals with it each year. I mean, that's 60 million people each year in the United States are dealing with some sort of a mental health crisis. So they look at it and go, okay, here's your ticket back out. Let's talk about what's going on in your life that's gone so wrong. So when they're suffering like this, they tend to self-medicate.
Oh,
So, so they turn to alcohol or other drugs, and to try to deal with the way they're feeling, which is pretty crummy, and that isn't helping them that much. It's if anything, if you're already depressed, alcohol is a depressant, and
yes,
that's
right.
not going to do that part of the brain any good.
No. Well, you've covered so much ground. There's so many directions to take this. First thing I think that you wouldn't be on the phone with these folks if they didn't really want a way out. It would seem to me.
Well,
So the fellow with the gun that was going to shoot himself, that was the veteran. Obviously, if he was wanting to do it, then he would have done it. So they're reaching out. They want to be talked out of it, I would
yeah.
think.
Well, there's an ambivalence there, and I think you've hit upon something there, Jim. Because what happens is the person becomes ambivalent about whether they live or die. And by knowing somebody is actually going to, engage with them and talk to them, it connects them at a different point. And because of that ambivalence of living or dying, what we need to do is find them in that moment, interrupt it before they do something rash. If you're this way about living or dying, the last thing you want to do is die. You're just seeing it as a way to end the pain. If there's a way for you to find life, get reconnected with your reasons for living and go on, take that way. And suicide is preventable for those reasons. That that if you're dealing with a mental health issue down below it all, we can get treatment for that. If you're talking about just having lost your reasons for living, we can reconnect you with those things. It really is an amazing thing. That's why 98% of the time we are able to, by the end of the phone call, have at least a plan. This person has a plan on how they're going to, go about living. That's remarkable.
It is remarkable. It seems to me that people do want to get talked out of it, and but at the same time, they're really seriously contemplating this. And Robin Williams came up in my mind right off the bat, and I'm sure anybody that was watching this done the same thing. But it would seem to me that the deterrent to it would be the damage you do to the people that love you. And the whole planet loved him, but he still did it. Is that something you would bring up to someone, that the damage you're going to do to your loved ones, or is that something that could cause more damage?
Well, it's kind of hard because then you're talking about guilt.
Yeah, right. I know. That's why.
and the trouble,
That's
there's
just,
a couple things. First of all, let's get a couple things straight. Suicide is not a selfish act. It is not an act of cowardice. It is not an act of weakness. We in this country have a real problem with mental health issues. We don't talk about them. We're ashamed of them. We put a stigma around them and we hide them. If your Uncle Fred killed himself, 50 years ago, and the family's just whispered about it, that's just a little family secret we don't talk about. Now, compare and contrast that to if you had a family history of heart disease or diabetes, what would you do? You go see the doctor, and the doctor would say, okay, so I'm not going to tell you to snap out of this. What we're going to do for your diabetes is we're going to figure out what's your insulin level like, what's your, what is your, exercise regime, what's your diet like. Let's get this balanced out and deal with it. You would tell your kids, hey, be aware that we've got this family history of this stuff happening. So,
watch your diet.
Watch your diet and take good care of yourself. And if you get diabetes, be a good patient. Or heart disease the same way. I mean, heart disease is the biggest killer of all. In its various forms, heart attacks and heart failure and stuff like that. And we will tell people, coming from my own family, and I understood very clearly that the men on my dad's side of the family had a long history of having heart problems. And so why we don't do that with mental health issues is they're only wanting an answer because we're ashamed of it. And until we get to the point where we don't become ashamed of it and we talk about it openly and recognize it not as a moral failing or a personal weakness, but as a psychological / physiological health issue, we now have parity. We now have, if you can go to see your doctor for a broken arm the same way you can go see a doctor now for mental health issues, depression and so on.
Yeah, and isn't that where they can get prescription drugs too easily? That's been on the news lately.
Yeah.
So
Well, we can
wanted to
we can
cover
shift
that.
gears into that because It's prescription drugs is a huge problem, and let me be clear. When we're talking about prescription drugs, we're talking about what are a class of drugs that are called opioids. They're painkillers, and generally speaking, they're OxyContin. Oxycodone is its actual term. OxyContin is its street name. Hydrocodone, which is quite often known as Vicodin, and some other things that you see out there. And the way that these things work is because they're painkillers, they're just a few molecules different between them and heroin/morphine. And so it's pretty easy for somebody to get hooked on these. And while they have a supply of them, either there's two routes. There's the person who's been prescribed them and they got hooked on them to deal with the pain that is real. And then there's another group of people that take them to get the high, like heroin would give you a high. And once you're hooked on that, boy, you got trouble because you need more and more to get the same high. Eventually, somebody's going to cut you off because you can't go doctor shopping. And what used to be a fairly inexpensive pill on the street is now costing you $40 to $50, $60, $80 a pill.
Well, you go to
I
heroin.
just don't know where you get that kind of money.
You've got it. That's exactly right. There aren't too many places you can get it. Basically, you have to turn to some sort of robbery or whatever the case. But you hit upon it because heroin is faster, cheaper, and easier to get than these pills. And we're seeing a huge problem in our 18 to 25, predominantly male part of our population that has gotten hooked on oxycodone, hydrocodone, these opioids, and now are now no longer being able to afford it, have to seek something easier. And then now you're into a whole different realm because where you were in the prescription drugs and you were hooked on them, there's an exact formulation for each one of those pills. Exact. Okay. Heroin,
You don't know what's in
it's
it.
a total shoot.
Yeah.
It could be cut, it could be not cut, it could be really full of junk or not. That's why sometimes they'll get these batches, what they call hot heroin, where it hasn't been cut as much, and so the dose you took yesterday, you bubble up to the same amount today of this other stuff, and it's so pure it kills them on the spot.
That happens a lot.
And it's hard to think of, and for a lot of people who would sit there and say, well, I'd never stick a needle in my arm or do whatever the case is. That's not the way most heroin addicts start. They start by smoking it or snorting it. Eventually, they discover the most efficient method of delivering the drug is by injection. It gets in the bloodstream quicker and so on and so forth. But these aren't things people are sitting around and thinking about in the light of day. And we saw, because we get so many phone calls, and the number one drug we get phone calls about is alcohol. Far and away. Alcohol is the number one drug.
It's the
we
most
get.
available.
Well, yeah, and it's you're by far and away. But about 2007, 2008, on our lines where we get these thousands of phone calls a year, we started seeing prescription drugs, prescription opioids, march up in the stack of drugs of concern, past heroin, cocaine, ecstasy, marijuana, blah blah blah. And you're just looking at it and you're going, it's going just like this. And so we were seeing it in real time, and sure enough, we were concerned about it and sort of led the way on getting information out. And what happened then was, after that point, the Centers for Disease Control said we've got an epidemic in this country with prescription drug abuse. The DEA recognized it as such. They've just moved some of these drugs onto Schedule II. They just made an announcement by the DEA that they're going to give you an opportunity to return these more easily than they have been in the past. Because with prescription drugs, you look at it this way. XYZ pharmaceutical company manufactures this thing under great controls. They transfer it under great controls. They give it to your pharmacy under great controls. Great pharmacy hands you a bag and says, here, Richard, this is yours now.
Okay.
Bye-bye. And so you go and supposedly take it as not. Now, there's a couple things that could happen. You use one and get sick and don't use the rest of them. You use them all. But you don't really, most of us don't even lock them up in our medicine chest, as powerful as they are.
Yeah.
So when it comes to those prescription drugs getting diverted and abused, you know what percent of those come from drug dealers out in the public, those pills? 5%.
5%.
Yeah,
The rest are from friends. And
70% are from friends, most of them without their knowledge. Most of them without their knowledge, because, okay, so let's say I've got a habit and I go in and say, hey, good to see you, Jim. Can I use your restroom for a second? Where am I going?
Medicine cabinet.
Thank you. And that's exactly right.
Yeah,
Or grandma's
yeah.
house, same thing. You know, so if you have these drugs, lock them up. If you no longer need them or they've expired, dispose of them. And the DEA just made it very simple. In the next 30 days, you're going to be able to return those to pharmacies. You're going to be able to get a mailer to send them back in. Up until then, it had to be a chain of custody through law enforcement for them to incinerate them. So we're making it a lot easier to get these things out of the house. And it's not a question of somebody coming over and taking your pain drugs. It's a question of if you don't need them or they're expired, get rid of them. Don't flush them down the toilet. Don't put them in the garbage. And if you want them, lock them up. It's just responsible.
Sure.
We're just sitting here going, really? I'm like the biggest drug dealer there is because I'm that guy. I'm not the 5% guy. I'm the guy who's, you know.
Yeah, sure.
I wouldn't even know if the drugs were gone usually. You know, I don't keep count of how many pills I have, you know.
Well, I saw something on TV a while back. I forget all the statistics, but there's been more overdoses for prescription drugs than all the other drugs put together
Yeah.
by a large magnitude.
Yeah.
Because it's a terrible epidemic
That's
for
right.
overdoses, let alone addiction.
We have more deaths by prescription drug overdose 2 times those that we have of automobile deaths. And
Which is enormous.
it's a huge problem. And we have to be aware of, you know, what all that means for all of us. Because the fact is, people do need effective pain management. You know, if you've hurt yourself, you've had surgery or something like that, there's no question you're going to recover more smoothly if your pain is managed, you know, if you're, you know, if you're doing your stuff. So there's a place and a role for this, and we have to make sure that we manage it very carefully.
Yes, and especially like, you know, with the folks coming back from Vietnam and the PTSD with
Yep.
like abused spouses and all these different things. I forget what the percentage is, but there's a large amount of our population that is suffering some form of some degree of PTSD. None of us are brought up 100% correctly, and you know, we've had issues our whole life, and we bury these things, and then later on, you know, they have repercussions, and a lot of people go to drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, and post-traumatic stress is just
Yeah.
is just that. It's said to be a normal person's response to an abnormal event. And in the case of the military, for example, there's nothing normal about war. Nothing normal about it. And yet, you know, you allude to Vietnam. We did a very poor job with our soldiers coming back from Vietnam because in many cases they were in the jungle one day and 36 to 72 hours later they're cashed out at Oakland and have a nice life. Oh, by the way, everybody's going to spit on you now. You didn't expect that. So at least the positives there are we're taking better care of our warriors when they return. And we're also, as a society, we're understanding that however we might feel about whatever the war is or whatever, we can be there for the soldiers who put themselves in harm's way on our behalf.
Sure, and I think something that a lot of people maybe didn't realize in World War II or whatever, that it isn't so much that they were out there and they were in danger and that people were shooting at them and their buddies were dying, although that is an issue. It's what they were having to do, like especially in an occupation like Iraq and Afghanistan, when our soldiers have been kicking down the doors, they've been, you know, actually killing a lot of innocent civilians. Well, that stuff wasn't going on except for maybe dropping bombs from planes, and then you don't see it.
Right.
So I think a lot of that is some of the most, you know, it isn't like the, how would you phrase this? The sensitive people are the ones that suffer the most.
Yeah, and then there are some people that you wouldn't qualify as sensitive. I mean, we've got drill instructors who have
Yeah, you
fallen
wouldn't
prey
think they
to.
would.
Well, you
Yeah.
know, but I don't mean that. I don't mean that. That's, you know, they're not a touchy-feely group of people, as
No,
anybody's
no
ever been in the
kumbaya.
service can tell you. Drop and give me 700.
Yeah.
But what happens there is you've got a situation where they get involved in this and they don't know how to shake it. When you talk about our military helpline, it's really important, the same with our teen line, that we have peers on the line. Most of the people who answer our military helpline are themselves veterans or have been trained in military culture, which is very different. And because the veteran goes in with two things that make it very difficult for them to get help. One is the warrior mentality. Suck it up.
Suck it up. Don't talk about it.
And don't talk about
Yeah.
it. And 2, don't let anybody know about this because they'll think you are weak. And then active duty has a bigger problem because if you're an active duty soldier and you've got, you know, and you're dealing with PTSD or some other mental health issue, that can stop your career cold.
Can also be a danger to your group.
Well, yeah, but this is the
Yeah.
other part. Okay, so
Yeah.
the 3 of us, It's quite often said that when people go to war, they're not necessarily fighting for their country. In the finest moment, if you were in the Easy Country, company, the Band of Brothers of World War II, at that point they were not fighting for mom and apple pie. They were fighting for the guys around them.
That's
But
right.
if we go out, the three of us, and I've confessed to you, I said, I don't know if I can raise my weapon. You quickly pull Richard over and you say, hey, Parker over there, we can't count on him, so we're going to have to really watch ourselves.
I'm going to park Parker. Huh?
Yeah, we're not going to do anything bad to him, but he's not going to be helpful. So it's really difficult. And again, I'd come back, and I don't want to let this point get missed. Post-traumatic stress is treatable. You know, those triggers will always be there for people. That, you know, if in the case of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, a cell phone can put them off because that's used as an implement to start off an IED or what have you. You see a lot of vets and, for that matter, policemen who never like to sit with their back to a window or a door. You know, and so you have to recognize these things go on. So you might always have that. You know, we always have 4th of July when fireworks are going off. And a lot of vets really have a hard time with all those concussions and everything else.
Sure.
Because it puts them back in a state of mind. That being said, with therapy and the right regime, you can get to the point you say, okay, that's got it. That's, you know, here's my response when I hear fireworks. This is predictable that I'd feel this way, but here's what I know about what to do about it. And most of these folks can be restored to really fully functional lives, which is exactly what we want for all of our vets. We want it for all citizens, but especially our vets who have given us so much. We want to make sure that they are getting the best opportunity to make a great life for themselves, because they wrote us a blank check.
Sure. You know, I would think to some degree or another, everybody that calls you has probably had in some form of PTSD.
You can, you know, post-traumatic stress is, as I said before, it's a normal person's response to an abnormal event. It's like, gosh, good Lord help you if you see somebody in a car accident, a pedestrian hit by somebody, that's going to stick with you, or somebody, you know, whatever it might be that targeted it for you.
Sure. Well, and knowing that being addicted for a while and not being able to stop it, that's got to create some PTSD. You know, I would just think that a lot of the reasons why people call you, they are suffering, and it's an ongoing suffering, and they haven't been able to do anything about it themselves. That's stressful.
Well, it's very hard all the way around, and that's why we've got, you know, the 4 different lines. If somebody were to call, like the alcohol and drug line, we'd work with them talking about what's going on with them, but that line is mostly for referral and intervention. You know, we don't do daily counseling of people. That's not what we do. We're a crisis service.
Just what I was thinking.
You know, we're a crisis service, and then we say, okay, so let's think about this. Let's see where we could maybe get you into tonight that would be able to help you. You know, and what about this? Do you have, you know, we look through different options, like do you have insurance? You don't have insurance. So here's some options you might have. What's your background in this? Our people are really highly trained. We work off of a database that is huge that allows us, this is the great thing, you look at a state like Oregon where we're just spread out all over the place. I mean, we tend to get tunnel vision thinking it's, you know, Portland, you know, Salem, Eugene, the Willamette Valley,
Most
maybe
of the people
Bend,
are here, yeah.
most Bend, but the fact is, you know, a lot of people live out in what's called the frontier, Eastern Oregon. 40% of our veterans live in more of a rural environment. So how do you reach them and how do we give them services? So if somebody calls us from Fossil, we can say, hey, well, Richard, here's you know, here's your nearest this, that. I mean, in a lot of cases, they still have to go and travel a bit, but we know.
Some of your people.
Pardon?
To travel them? To
No.
see if they can help them?
No. For example, we would say in our database, so let's say we're on the phone and you're telling me you're from Fossil, and I'm typing in, okay, show me either rehab centers near Fossil, or show me where's the nearest VA, or wherever this is, or what can we, you know, is there a place for rehab, or whatever it is we're looking for. And then it would give you some ideas where the closest place is, so they could get the help that's geographically closest to them. In some cases, it's just never geographically close to them. But no, we're not doing that part of it. We're doing a lot of the homework for them. You know, let's try this, try that, contact these people if you're in this area. And then because we're also a spillover for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, we're one of 6 centers nationwide that pick up extra calls when the system is taxed. We have that same thing for every state in the union. So we can, you know, somebody calls us from Georgia, we can still have our conversation with them and still point them in the right direction. When you hear the Veterans Crisis Line, they always refer people to the main suicide prevention number, which is 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-8255.
Oh, okay.
And then it says, if you're a veteran, press 1. Well, that goes to the Veterans Crisis Line first. And then, depending on how busy they are, that could get instantaneously shuffled to one of the other 6 centers, including us. And so we can help them out wherever they are.
Is that 273 talk?
I'm not sure about that.
Yes. 800-273-TALK.
Yeah, you got it over there.
And again, that's that basic crisis line, and we invite people to call. Your family, if you're family, friends concerned, whether it's about an individual, a veteran, about a teen, about anybody, call us, and we can sort of walk you through the steps of how to get a conversation started. And what we would do in this case was, if I was on the phone, you would encourage me to call that number and say, gee, Tom, would you call the suicide number and go? If you don't mind, I'd like to go back to the beginning of this conversation
Sure.
about the suicide line, because it's imperative people know about this. That's a 24/7 number. That's free. It's confidential, and we know what to do. We have the techniques. We have the words to say. There's a myth. There's a couple myths about suicide. One of them is, if you mention it to me, I'm going to get the idea for the first time.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. It
Yeah.
might happen.
Jim, I never
rarely.
thought about that. That's the answer I've been looking for. I'm
Give
going
me
to
a
write you down
gun.
in my note, and it's not the case at all. It gives them an opportunity to talk about it. And speaking of talking about it, that's the other big myth. The myth goes, if they're talking about it, they're not going to do it. That is not true. If they're talking about it, it's a cry for help. So if you start seeing warning signs in your friends, and there's a lot of them, but let's say up at the top of the list is finding lethal means, getting a gun or pills, rope, whatever they're going to do. That's a big 4-alarm thing right there.
Anything.
If they start talking about things like, well, I'm a burden to folks, I don't want to be a burden anymore, that's important. Suddenly withdrawn when they used to be outgoing. Big changes in the way maybe they're drinking or using substances. Big changes in their sleeping habits.
Did I get the number right?
You've got the number right.
That's it.
No, it isn't. It's
800.
1-800-273-TALK.
Oh,
That's the
I got
National
that.
Suicide Prevention Lifeline. We are that for, so it's an easy number to remember, and we make that uniform across the nation.
I was probably to open up another can of worms. You're talking about suicide, but at the same time, a lot of the danger of these people, besides killing themselves, they're going to damage somebody else. And spousal abuse is a really big issue. And do you have situations when people call up and they are either being abused and they want to get out of it via suicide, or people calling up and saying that they are being abusive? Is there much call for that? I would think there would be.
It's really difficult, Jim, because that's really a domestic violence situation.
Right.
And
But people are screaming for help there.
Well, exactly. And at that point, if a woman was on the phone or a man was on the phone saying, I'm being exposed to domestic violence, we would say, let's say Portland, call the Portland Women's Crisis Line.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're as equipped in that specific area as we are in ours.
And yours, right.
Okay, and they know what to do. And it's baffling. I mean, you look at this latest case that was just in the news about Ray Rice.
Yeah,
Baltimore
that's
Raven.
what made me think of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you look at that situation, you go, well, here's some guy who's used to taking out NFL linebackers, and he's taking out a woman who's 5'2", 220 pounds with a cracked left
a
jab.
left jab.
And that is such a baffling thing, how domestic violence works. But domestic violence, there's a real psychology to it. It happens very minutely. People look at it and say, well, why would she want to marry this guy? Why would they put up the first time anything happened? It didn't start like that.
No.
It didn't start with a haymaker. It started with probably something as simple as they were going out, you look beautiful today. Hey, you left your shoes on the wrong side of the porch. I don't like that. Get these rules down. So I'm just going to maybe ignore you for a while, give you the cold shoulder. And then there comes a stage where, so it starts with honeymoon, Mr. Nice Guy, Mr. Wonderful. Then there's an infraction, some rule. There's 1,000 rules, or actually 1,001. You just don't
We
know what
don't
the
even
next
realize that
rule
we
is.
have them.
And then there's a blow up. Then there's all this thing saying, oh, baby, forgive me. I'll never do that again. And then Mr. Wonderful again, and on it goes. I mean, personally, and I'm not an expert in this, but I'm convinced that's exactly what happened with Noel Simpson Brown, OJ. That was a classic case of domestic violence.
Ah, good point. Yeah. Yeah, but they all suffer PTSD, and I was thinking that could lead to somebody just giving up.
Oh, sure. I mean, and that's
then
what
they
you don't
would
want
be
to do.
calling
So
for
if they were
suicide.
calling us, we would talk to them about that. We wouldn't hang up and say, call the domestic violence thing. We would say, okay, look, it sounds like you're suffering a domestic violence situation. Let's start by saying what's going on with you. We would go through a normal conversation, which is what's happening in your life that makes you want, well, mate, you know, in domestic violence, da, da, da. Let's look at what some of your options are, including calling this line, but also, you know, if you got somebody to support you. It's very complex, but we would never just hang up on anybody. Never. We have conversations that go on as long as the person needs them to go on. Sometimes they go on for hours, sometimes they go on for just minutes, depending on where the person's at. Because not everybody is at that same state of deciding they're going to take their life or what have you.
So if they talk to you, and it'll simply tie up one of your listeners for a while, which is good.
Yeah,
which
that's
is
what we're
good.
there for.
That's right.
We're not multitasking. You know,
Okay.
that person is yours during the case of that call. Now, it's interesting because in our youth line that we have, for the Lines for Life youth line,
Oh,
which is
yes.
designed for teens talking to teens, we have that's hosted 6 hours a day live from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. for kids after school. We have two things. We have a regular phone line, and then we've got a texting line. And that's what, as the expression goes,
good
that's what
idea.
those kids are doing today.
Yeah.
But we have a texting line for the military helpline as well. And the reason is, if we're sitting here watching TV or talking, or whatever the case is, you guys are talking and I am like dying on the inside,
Okay.
I can bring this thing up without you guys knowing it and get a text conversation going. That just, I'm the only one who knows the thing's going.
Totally private.
I mean, maybe it's
Yeah.
obvious if we're sitting this close together, but if we're sitting on the couch together, I could have a whole different thing going on. We have the ability for folks to carry that on. That has quickly become the #1 way youth contact us.
Well, you said there was what? How many youths out of 90 kids out of 717?
Out of the 717 deaths, about
90
90 of those each year.
That's a year in Oregon?
Think about that. I mean, think for a second of any other public health problem that was preventable, where 717 or 700 on the average people a year died. We'd be hollering about it. We'd expect film trucks out in front of the building. We'd want some answers,
right.
and we'd have action and stuff like that. Instead, because they're individual acts, because we don't understand them, and because we feel shameful, and because we feel guilty, and because we think something went wrong, we don't discuss it.
It's just rough to me because you see a lot about just recently where a girl or a guy has been given a hard time over the internet or
Oh, yeah.
whatever, and they kill themselves.
It's real.
And it seems to me, now how could that be? I mean, it's just people just talking on the internet. But
You know what you're doing. I'm going to take a wild guess here. You're more than 17.
Yeah, just
Okay.
a little over.
I've been there a couple times myself. So it has changed so substantially. When a time when we were in school, you'd go to school, 9 o'clock in the morning you'd check in, you'd try to avoid your bully the best you could. 3 o'clock comes and you're safe. As soon as you get home, you're home free until the next morning when you get to school again.
That's right.
That's gone. Because now, remember when you used to worry about dropping your tray in the cafeteria and everybody laughing at you? Well, now, not only that, Richard, I've got video of you doing that.
doing
And I'm going to post that on YouTube. And in just a second, Jim's girlfriend just broke up with him just ahead of the prom. I'm going to text that to everybody.
She's
so
going out with someone else
and
behind
going
his
out
back.
with somebody else, who's and so in all these things, Facebook, social media, phone calls, text messages, they're pervasive. Now you can sit there and be glib and say, well, then turn off your phone. It isn't quite that easy.
That's your
So-
lifeline.
And so now you have I would dare anybody who's watching right now, just to close your eyes for a second and think back on your bully when you were 15, let's say, and how you felt viscerally when you saw them. This kid's going to kick my butt, or she's going to say
Embarrass
horrible
me
things
or
about me, or
something.
embarrass
Yeah.
me, or make me feel awful. And remember, at that age, I mean, the concept of Friday night is a long-term concept. This is not, our brains are developing through our teen years. So this isn't just going to happen right away. So they get to the point and they're trying to figure out, how do I cope? And a lot of them cope by using substances or by this phenomenon called cutting, where they'll cut themselves to try to get a different kind of pain.
Oh, that's
Or
incredible.
Or they'll, it's really hard. And so what happens when they call our teens, again, we walk them through on a very personal conversation, and it's a peer. So you're not talking to some old person who's 25. You're talking to somebody who's a high school student like you. And you're also in an incredible safe situation because you don't have to worry about it getting back. Now, if you're 15 years old and you're talking to your buddy who's also 15, there's always that chance,
Yeah.
not likely, that he could rat you out and say,
Post it on Facebook.
hey, here's this. By the way, Jim's afraid that his girlfriend's cheating on him. I think she is. This is a very safe environment, and we can help steer them.
It's funny you should mention the word peer, because I was thinking, I remembered back many years ago, it might have been the 80s or 70s, that I guess psychologists determined that peer pressure with the young people is more powerful than authority.
Oh yeah.
It passed that a long time ago, and that was before internet and Facebook. Imagine,
you wanna
like
fit
what
in.
you're saying, it's much stronger now than it ever was then.
Right.
And authority is just someone you steal their pills from. Maybe now, I don't know. I mean, they're just
it isn't fear of anything. Although parents, it's really important to remember that parents still have a huge impact on their kids in terms of listening to them, and they can be talked to about drugs and alcohol and some of the pitfalls there. But peer pressure is huge. It's huge for adults. You see it all the time with adults. You see stupid behavior in 40-year-olds. Thing to never lose sight of is, we see a baby born and we see them grow. You forget the fact that, by the way, even by the time they get to be teenagers, their brain is still growing and developing. You really don't get the full end of judgment till the end of that process, which
That's
is
right.
in your low 20s.
Yeah.
You don't really have empathy too early on, which is why you end up with these merciless bullies and stuff. So it's really glib for us to say, hey, look, this is going to be so much better as soon as you get out of high school. And they're going, that's 2 years from now. I don't know what to do with
Yeah,
that."
and even then it won't be good.
No.
Won't be, yeah.
And so that's why you have to, meet them where it's at. And that's why actually, for teens especially, turning to substances, drugs, alcohol, to deal with it is really difficult because it alters a couple of things. It alters the brain, it alters the pleasure-pain circuitry in your brain, and it's clearly shown that the earlier a young person gets involved with substances, the more likely they are to have a lifetime of problems. You get a 12-year-old who's drinking or smoking pot or whatever the case is on a semi-regular basis, I can guarantee you that they've loaded the gun 5 to 6 times more likely to have lifelong substance abuse problems.
And then nicotine. They all start that pretty young, and that's a tough one for people to quit.
Do you think? It's more addictive than heroin?
Mm-hmm. That's what I understand.
All you have to do is spend one weekend with nicotine, 40 hours, and you're hooked.
You're hooked.
And there's a lot of people watching this who know what I'm talking about. And there's some people that say, well, I just enjoy smoking so much I never want to quit. I'm a former smoker, and I have to like to say BS. But it's, it took a long time for me to kick that habit.
Say, me too.
And yet that's the same thing. Started with peer pressure, started with a stupid move. Sorry, the Surgeon General report was out long before I started smoking.
Now there's vapor stores.
Okay.
Oh, for that e-cigarettes and
Which-
things. Yeah.
Well, but those are
Something's wrong with that, but I
they're
don't think
used
it-
two ways. There's two interesting things about that. First of all, the vapor stores. There's the part with the electronic cigarettes, so they can smoke in and get the nicotine delivered, which is what the cigarette is, right? It's a nicotine delivery
delivery
method.
system. Yeah.
But they also use it to smoke dope. And so literally, because they vaporize things, you could have a kid sitting in the back of a classroom using, this concentrated THC from marijuana and smoke it, getting high in the back of the class. You wouldn't smell it, you wouldn't see it.
Yeah. I think marijuana in the 70s was like 3 to 6%, and those concentrates can be up to 70%.
Really?
And that, yeah.
This is not your father's
no,
Oldsmobile.
it's not at all.
It's crazy. It's very different than anything we've seen before. It's really tough. I don't want to go about trying to tell anybody how to live their life. but our organization, Alliance for Life, is really strongly objects to anything that puts drugs and alcohol in the hands of youth, especially because they're in their formative years, because it doesn't do them any good, and it can create a lifetime.
So you must be against Measure 92 then.
91?
Is it 91? I thought it was 92.
Yeah,
the
well, it's-
marijuana legalization.
marijuana legalization. Our big concern about that. Well, there's a couple.
Because it's not supposed to be for kids. No,
Well, that's the point. They're saying even the authors of it are saying this. We want to protect kids from this.
right, they do. More than one place.
So they say-
I've read all 36
Yeah.
pages.
So they say we want to protect the kids from this. So we're going to put it in the hands of OLCC. Well, hopefully my sarcasm isn't lost on you, but
I know
that's
it's coming.
worked so well with alcohol
Yeah.
and beer.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, whatever it is you have, whatever the substance is, when you increase the supply and the availability, it's going to fall in the hands of kids. Right now, in the country, on the average, only 7.5% of the people use marijuana. On average, in the United States. In part because it's illegal, so, but if you make it legal and you increase the supply, it just stands to reason. My personal concern about Measure 91 is, do we get a prize for being the third state to rush out and do this? We've got an experiment going on across the Columbia River that just started 2 months ago, I think practically today.
That's right.
You've got Colorado coming online. Why wouldn't, just from a standpoint of logic, whether you're for or against the concept, why wouldn't you want to wait and see what the pitfalls are of the way that they've brought it in? I mean, right now, for example, there is no field sobriety test for marijuana. None.
I thought they had one in Washington.
Oh,
And the way the bill 91 is written, we don't even have a level of THC in the blood. But the thing is, and it's going to be a field day for defense attorneys, because they're going to say, well, you brought in a drug recognition expert and we'll tear that apart or what have you. And now you realize that it could have been the weekend, and Fred, my client, was smoking marijuana, which is his perfect right to do in the state. By the way, we've been decriminalized in Oregon for 40 years. So Monday you give him a test, and he's still got it in his system because it's it takes about a month to flush it out of your system.
Yeah.
yeah.
And so we don't know. We don't have any way really of knowing where he was at, for example, at a time of an arrest or something like that. It's just, it's really sketchy, and people are running around yelling things like reefer madness and drug paranoia, and the only people against this are cops. I think any thinking person would say, I know if I was going to do something like have eye surgery, I'd want to watch somebody else, a lot of somebody else's, have that operation before I stuck my eyes.
At least
into
talk
that
to
laser.
him anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you know what I mean. I want somebody who's done a lot of it. And so, you got Colorado the first state, Washington the second. We don't get a gold medal for being third. If anything, the best bet would be to sit, watch how this comes in, and then say, okay, so we saw what the unintended consequences are of this. Let's say we still want to have this ability to do this, but we're going to write in these additional laws. I don't see what the hurry is. The proponents of this will say, well, there's no hurry. It doesn't come online until 2016. And you're saying, yeah, but that's inevitable. I mean, you mark this point in time, and it comes. So that's as soon as you get your infrastructure built up for it. But our big concern is what the negative effects are on youth.
Well, that's totally understandable. We're running out of time
Yeah,
here.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I've been chatting with you guys.
Well,
I'm
and
just-
I want him to sum up what, again,
There was one question.
what they do and the benefits.
Before he gets to that, I got one quick question.
Please.
You say that somebody calls up and they can talk to someone who's young. Is it the luck of the draw who they get?
If they call, there's for the youth, there's a special number. It's 1-877-YOUTH-911. 877-YOUTH-911.
Does it not work out if they talk to someone older?
Well, the idea is they're talking to a peer.
Yeah,
Now
okay,
that line
all
is
right,
available
all right.
24 hours a day, and so when we answer the phone, we say, there are youth there from 4 p.m. until 10 p.m. every day of the week to answer that line.
Right.
The other 18 hours were available to them, but and give them the option. Do you want to talk to somebody about this right now? We can have you, an adult who's understanding and we'll give you very similar treatment. But if you only want to talk to a youth, that's it. So we have really 4 distinct lines. We have an alcohol and drug line, we have the suicide line, then we have the military helpline, and we have the youth line.
These are all different numbers. Then.
They're all different numbers. depending on what people need. So if you're calling the suicide line, it's 1-800-273-TALK.
Right.
If you're calling the youth line, it's 1-877-YOUTH-911. For those of you doing the math at home, you'll recognize there's one too many digits there. But by the time you hit that second one, you're already ringing.
You're
on the
already
phone
there,
system.
yeah.
So, I'm trying to remember. I think the military helpline is 888-457-4838. But you can find information about the military helpline online at militaryhelpline.org. You can find information about the youth line at OregonYouthLine.org. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is readily available. You can find that number anywhere. It's 1-877-273-TALK or 1-800-273-TALK. And the alcohol and drug line is there as well.
Won't these all be on the Alliance for Life's website?
They'd be on the Lines for Life website. You go to Lines, LINES for FOR Life, LIFE.org. And all this stuff, it'll point you in the right direction, or you can go to militaryhelpline.org and find theirs, or OregonYouthLine.org and find it there as well. It's all part of the umbrella of the work that we do at Lines for Life to help keep citizens safe, preventing substance abuse and suicide.
What got you into this?
Well, it's interesting.
Personally,
I've lived a
Good
life.
question.
I'm the communications director, and I had a background of radio and television for years. I've known a ton of people. I myself am in recovery almost 30 years. So here I am on a conversation with you guys, still feeling a little bit reluctant, getting back to that shame and stigma of saying, "Hey, look, I'm a clean and sober person who once was an alcoholic. I am an alcoholic." So having that background, having a lot of people that I worked with in the industry, having friends that took their own lives, being able to maybe prevent that same thing to happening to somebody else to me, it's a great calling. I work on behalf of the organization to get stories out, to talk to people, to answer these things. The real work is done by our 150 volunteers and our crisis line counselors who take those calls 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And without them, we couldn't do it. We couldn't afford to do it. If this is something that resonates with somebody watching the program, go to linesforlife.org, and information there for volunteering. And of course, we're always looking for financial support. If it's something that speaks to you, if one of these things really sounds like something you'd like to be involved with, we have these working programs. Come alongside of them. It's we're almost a 20-year-old organization, and we've got a great track record.
Right.
And you have how many staff? 150 volunteers?
We have total staff, part-time and full-time, is like just 21. And then we have 150 volunteers, because each volunteer does not only the 60 hours of training, but then they commit to 1 4-hour shift a week for a year. So that's 208 hours on the shifts and another 60 hours of training. So that's quite a commitment. And we've had folks from the Portland Police Bureau take the training. A lot of folks take it and find it very useful.
I want to thank our guest, Tom Parker, for coming on and providing us with so much information and summing it up like you just did. And I hope we can go to our
Right.
our schedule of replay times.
Good idea.
There we go. Okay, thank you.
All right, Tom. God,
That's
thanks.
it.
You did a great
My
job.
pleasure. I
man.
really
Oh,
appreciate you fellas giving
Yes, welcome back, everybody. And just in time, too. Our guest is Tim McMenamin. Is that right? I don't have a Tim on here.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
here it is.
Yeah. Tim McMenamin.
Well, they can't
and,
see that with the camera. The camera doesn't do that much magic. And you're running for,
State Representative,
okay,
House District 41,
okay.
which is a tough district. Half of it is in Clackamas County and half of it
Oh, that's
is
right.
in
I remember
Multnomah
you
County.
talked to
Yeah.
a gerrymandering special,
Yes.
something like that.
So are you running against an incumbent, or is this an open seat, or?
No, the incumbent, I retired this election. She,
Oh,
yeah, she was there, would be 14 years. She did file on the very first day that you could for the seat, and then for some reason on the second of the last day, she withdrew.
yeah.
So I don't know. I kind of like to think that it's because nobody ever ran against her for the first 10 years, and then when I ran last election, lost, but we never quit. The day after the election, we were out knocking on doors and everything,
Okay.
and beating. So that's good.
That's always good.
Maybe she's just tired of the fight after 14 years.
Well, you know I mean, she never had an opponent really.
Is she a Democrat or a Republican?
She was, yes,
She was
or she is, I guess.
A
Yeah.
Democrat?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and but I kind of like to think just the battle itself, and
So you're coming in as a Democrat or Republican?
Republican.
So
and-
you've got someone you're going.
Yeah, the Republican. I also got the Libertarian nomination.
That's right.
And so
Well, that can take some votes from you then if you're running Republican.
Well,
so are you able to distance yourself from the Libertarian there?
well, I when folks ask me questions, the answers I give, they say, well, that's the Libertarian point of view, and I say, well, that's, I mean, you know.
How does anyone know that? I don't know where this libertarian and independent.
Independent and yes, and the Independent Party, I would have liked to receive their nomination, but I think I don't agree with the open elections, which is ballot measure.
The open primaries?
Open primaries, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the Democrats have come out against it. The Republicans, everybody's come out against it. But you know, the money's there. The commercials are on TV, and I don't think a lot of people have really given a lot of thought that what you're going to end up with if they're open primaries is just the two people with the most money. So
what's the difference about that and the way it is now then?
well, I don't
typically.
have any money, but
Right.
I'm the Republican and the Libertarian nomination to run.
Okay.
And if I was running in this race, it would have been probably the two Democrats, since they each had close to $300,000.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, for a state rep, that's a fairly good amount of money.
that's just the primary,
Yeah.
you know. So
So this is the primary coming up then?
no, that
this was in the past.
Yeah, that was the primary.
All right.
That's how much money they had to spend, and now we're in the general election. So.
Where's the Working Families Party? Have they come in for either you or your opponent?
My opponent.
They
yes.
have?
Yeah.
Oh,
They typically go Democrat or Progressive, but not always. I think there was a couple of the last election. They were actually had a couple of Republicans on there.
Oh.
I can't remember which one it was. It was a smaller election. It wasn't a big one. But the Working Families Party is a party that can go in that will throw their weight behind another candidate, whether it's, it doesn't matter whether it's Republican, Democrat, or whatever. It's just whatever suits their fancy, so to speak. They'll put their name under that. So it was you'd be able to put Working Families Party under your name as well as Republican.
Exactly.
And that's very, very new. They didn't used to do that. They did years ago, but it was stopped. And the Working Families Party got it together to stop that and to let people have, if more than one party likes you, you should be able to put that on there. I would think.
Yeah, and I'm happy that I can. So
It's just so easy. If you're Republican, there's certain things to do with the Republicans. If you're Democrat, there's certain things to do with
Certain
Democrat.
platform, you mean.
And that's why it's difficult for me to get this independent libertarian. That's the one that really, kind of like, that's a free speaker, a free thinking person, something
But
like
they
that.
have a lot of places they change. They're different than a Republican Party. You know, like with marijuana for one thing.
yeah.
You know, they're for legalization, or at least they're for some kind of decriminalization. With the Republican
and,
Party,
you
isn't
know,
it?
it's
and
not-
there are other points of departure.
Right, exactly, and it's not just like with any, you know, Democrat or Republican. You're never going to find a candidate that agrees. I don't think 100% with the platform.
Right.
But when it comes down to it, that's the first question I usually get when I'm going door to door is, are you a Democrat or Republican? And I say I'm a fiscal conservative. And you know, I just
Which is pretty safe.
well, you know, it's the way it used to be here in Oregon. I don't, for us native Oregonians, you know, things used to work good, and they used to work good with a whole lot less money. And if you look at the state budget over the years, it was pretty constant at $10 billion a year. But that's when we had a lot of revenue coming in from forestry and mining and
right.
you know, and all kinds of different, you know, a lot more, I think, manufacturing and all. And then about 1987 is when it started. Neil Goldschmidt was elected, and the budget just started ballooning, which I don't really understand, because a lot of folks started moving into the state, and so you'd think like, well, you know, more people, more taxpayers, but so I don't understand why the huge growth.
Well, what about, it just seemed to me that when Goldsmith came in, reappeared, all of a sudden there's a light rail out to the airport. And I had the feeling he was behind that. He was able to make it happen. So,
Well, that brought in federal money, but I don't know what it did for our tax base.
Well, and the thing that a lot of folks forget, and that I have to remind them of, is, you know, they'll do it for the federal money, and they'll give you, you'll get federal dollars initially to build something, but then it's like, who's going to maintain it after that? You know, it's up to the taxpayers of the state. So
that's right.
And so
right.
that's what now we're stuck with. You know,
Wapato for one.
yeah. You
Yeah,
know,
Wapato.
you know,
Very
yeah,
unfortunate.
there you go. And I don't know why they couldn't use that for some.
Something.
Yeah, it's a nice facility.
Well, they're
House people from other states for money. Do something. Make something happen out there.
Yeah,
Just to sit there vacant.
you know,
Okay.
it could be used. Anything. You know, halfway house for the homeless to get 'em,
exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, get them in there. You know, so they have a residence. They can make phone calls. You know, they can be taught how to, you know, do an application and everything. And because it's really hard, the homeless, without having an address, you know, or a phone number or anything to get a job, to get
Sure.
back into the workforce. And if they could live there, you know, for a time being, and while they're applying for a job, you know, I think that would have been the best use of that facility. You know, there's one kind of close to it. Bud Clark's, Homeless Hilton down there, and
Oh, okay.
the only problem with that is that it's, you know, it's still a, I don't know what you know, I've heard wet facility or whatever, but you know, the folks don't have to, that are staying there, can still be an alcoholic or be a drug addict, and I think that's just not a good use of state's money to try to get somebody back into the workforce, because you know, if they're applying for a job, they're going to have to be clean and sober to begin with. So
You know, our previous guests, to do with the veterans and suicide, talking about drugs, and all that, that's certainly a part of whatever you'll be dealing with in Salem, I would
Huge.
imagine.
And you know, having firsthand experience with that as a pharmacist for 30 years,
Oh, yeah,
and the
that's right.
last 5 years dealing with all the services that our Department of Human Services delivers, you know, the homeless, the mental health, you know, foster, the assisted living, the skilled nursing care, you know, we did it all. And so I was able to see a lot and learn a lot from that.
Oh, I'm sure.
So,
You know, in my circle of friends, you hear a lot of I'm fiscally conservative, but I'm socially progressive. So obviously you're fiscally conservative. I doubt that you would consider yourself socially progressive. But where do you stand on some of these social issues, like minimum wage, say?
well,
Oh, yeah.
I think, you know, I don't think.
Especially the the $15 an hour.
Right, and-
15 Now, I think, is a
And
website.
What you're doing with that is you're basically telling a business owner, this, you know, this is what you have to pay your employees, or this is where you have to start at, and that's, I mean, I don't think that's right or that's fair. You know, if
You mean period? That they shouldn't have a minimum wage?
well, no, we do have a minimum wage, and it's higher than the federal wage, but to come in and almost double it, you know, tell somebody that has a small business, you know, this is what you're going to have to pay your employees now. I think the only thing that's going to lead to is more unemployment.
Yeah.
You know, you know, I talk to businesses. I have a lot of businesses in my district. A whole lot more on the Clackamas County side with International Way. I don't know if you've been on that, but
Actually, I have, yeah.
Bob's Red Mill and you know, the whole rest of them, but all sorts of small businesses, and you know, that's not really the issue that comes up. The issue that comes up is you know, employee taxes, health care, you know, and the amount of work that they have to do to hire an extra employee. They pretty much say, like, well, I'd like to hire a couple other full-time employees, but to do that, then we'd have to get a part-time accountant to keep track of the paperwork and the taxes on it
Yes.
and all. So they say, we just, you know, we're running it, you know, husband and wife and maybe, you know, one other person. I think a better approach would be to create jobs, and the best example we have is North Dakota.
It's the best unemployment rate in the country.
It is, and they're, you know, they, I think the lowest paid employee there is at a McDonald's, and they're getting $17.85 an hour, because
Oh, it's a restaurant?
yeah, McDonald's. I mean, because
Yeah.
you know, they're having to compete for employees, and so that's what I tell folks all the time is, instead of you being out there competing with 50 other folks for that one job, wouldn't it be great if there was like 50 employers, you know,
Sure.
competing for you, and right? And so then it's like, you know, if they're offering the lowest wage, well, nobody's going to take it. So they're going to have to hire, they're going to have to pay a higher wage to get a better employee and to retain the employees, and it's just better all the way around. So I think a better approach would just be to start making Oregon more business friendly, creating jobs, and you know, employing a lot of the chronically unemployed and the folks coming out of school. And
I've seen on
that's
this,
right.
I've seen this discussion on TV, and they make the statement that the states that implemented a higher minimum wage, the economy is actually booming better than the states that they haven't.
Well, I bet they have the work for them. Wouldn't they have the work
Well,
also?
they must have work, right? Sure.
Yeah, okay.
But you know, it would seem to me, you know, what you're saying is true. But at the same time, if someone's making money, they're going to spend it. And so that money will be going into the economy, so the economy is going to get better. And the downside of it is, according to what you say, is that the businesses that can't afford to pay that. So it's like anything else. Any legislation is going to have ups and downs, and it just depends. On, according to some folks at the states that have done this, and that depends on the state, obviously. Some of them are going to do better. Maybe some of them won't do as well. North Dakota doesn't have much of a population, so they need workers. Whereas there's probably not as many people in the state of North Dakota maybe as the whole Portland metropolitan area, and they also have a state bank. Rather than our government have to put money into, say, Wells Fargo or whatever, they put it into their own banking system, and that they're able to have a clearer way to give loans to smaller businesses and things. So they have a whole different infrastructure there that goes along with the minimum wage too, as well.
Yep, and I think almost every question you can answer has already been answered out there if you just look at.
Look somewhere at it.
Well, look at the other 50 states and
Sure.
what's working and what isn't. But, like I said, mandating a higher minimum wage, I think it's just
That's
going
right.
to. I think it's just going to hurt.
Well, we all got our eyes on Seattle.
There's a
They did it.
fine line. There's a fine line, and if you pay too much, then these problems develop. There's just the right amount to pay on minimum wage, and it just can't have anything to do with, well, you got to include health insurance. Well, you have to be able to. They have to be able to support a home and a family and all that. I don't know if that's going to work that way.
Well,
they
and,
need to.
and
do a
that's
better
the other
job.
thing is, maybe I'm dating myself, but when I was a kid, the minimum wage I started at when I started working was $1.75 an hour.
Mine was
And,
$1.50.
yeah.
So 12 bucks a day.
Right. They, minimum wage was never meant to support a family or to
Yeah,
buy a
that's
home
right.
or
That's
anything.
right.
It was, for a kid to get a car or for, somebody else in the family to bring in a little extra income or whatever. I mean, so, the whole talk of, I even, you could raise it 15, you could raise it $20 an hour.
Yeah, that's right.
I still don't think that's enough to raise a family on. You're still going to have, both parents and, and another.
Well, they say
Kids
two
working.
people can work, both parents can work, and at a minimum wage, and they'll still be above poverty level. They
Yeah.
still won't make enough to get above the poverty line. So, $20 an hour would cover that for one person, as opposed to $18 an hour for two people.
Yeah.
In Oregon, and I think it's $7.50 nationwide. But
We're kind of low, aren't we?
no, Oregon's really up there.
Yeah.
It's higher than, it's a couple bucks higher than the
Shoot.
national.
Okay.
Yeah.
good.
And
It's going to be $16 an hour, and no, it's going up down in California pretty high in 2016. I think it's going to go to $10 an hour, but that's still not a living wage. I mean, these days with the cost of everything, you can't even afford gas. I mean,
That's
You know,
right.
yeah.
That's right. Huh?
I mean, walking and knocking here Sunday, I was talking to a lady, and I hear a lot of stuff that I won't be able to take care of. I'm at the state level, and I hear a lot, of complaining about the city or about the county. But in this particular instance, she lived in Milwaukee and was complaining about the water rates going up $9 a month, which I know. I live in Milwaukee, and I know they have to, replace some infrastructure. It hasn't gone up in years, but to her, living on $800 a month Social Security,
that's smart.
well, $9 a month was, she's really worried about it.
That means
And-
something that has to come from somewhere else then.
Right. So, and with rising healthcare premiums and co-pays and all
Food.
that. Oh, everything, utilities, right.
Well,
and
the drought's
food.
going to cause food to go up, so there's going to be issues everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, now that we got a little idea where you stand on minimum wage, it's just kind of a barometer of your stance. You say that you ran last time and you lost, but you started running again right away. So you must really want this job bad. Why? Other than the fact that you're probably very well qualified.
Well, several reasons, and just having growing up in Oregon and seeing what we used to be, and then I moved to Corvallis for pharmacy school. I liked it there, bought a house in Corvallis, and ended up selling it and moving to Miami, where the
Florida?
where the jobs were. I was a pharmacist and owned a home in Corvallis, worked in Albany, and that was great for a couple of years until they put the spotted owl on the endangered species list. And of course, the mill towns really got hit, but Albany got hit pretty hard. But they still had they were diversified enough. But I could see it. I mean, the county wanted this piece of property and all, and I just didn't want to get stuck living in Corvallis and driving to the one job in Eugene or the one job in Salem, that hour commute each way and everything. So I sold the house and moved. But so I've lived in Florida, I've lived in Idaho, and I was, born and raised here in Oregon. And when I came back from Florida, I wasn't sure if it was me or if Oregon had changed. And I come to the conclusion that Oregon has changed, and it needs to be put back on the right track. And having campaigned now for 4 years and looking into issues that I would have never thought of before, it truly, we have so much waste and cronyism and
Speaking in the government, then.
yeah, our state government. So, I think just up front, if we had transparency, right? I mean,
Yeah.
death and taxes is something we're never going to get
You
away
won't get
from.
any progressive to argue that point, that
Well,
we
you know,
need transparency.
Transparency, and we don't have that right now. And transparency and accountability would be another
same
one.
thing, sure.
As a pharmacist, I'll fill 10,000 prescriptions a year. If I make one mistake, you're going to see me on the 5 o'clock news. I have to own it. But yet, in our state government, makes a mistake, and it's nobody, it's either no comment or just nobody wants to say, gosh, I made a mistake. And
I always had the impression when someone made a mistake, well, I'll just resign. That's all they had to do, just resign. Because there are other people make mistakes or lose money, they end up owing that money. And it's a whole different thing. So this thing where people can I'll just take off,
and I've done
can't get over it.
on my social media. I've done a lot of posts where, of course, Cover Oregon would be the best example. But folks resign and get rehired in another position in Cover Oregon, and the same with our school board and the school districts, and that leads into Senate Bill 100.
Oh, okay.
The land use law and everything, and that's just prohibiting a lot of businesses from expanding and wanting to create jobs. That was back in 1972, and then you had the tax revolt kind of happen in 1990, and with Measure. I forget the number on that one,
five?
but yeah, Measure 5, yes.
Oh, way
that's right.
back.
Yeah,
1980.
well,
Way back machine.
1990. I mean, it wasn't that 90.
Okay.
That's not
Well,
that
that's
long ago. And,
24 years.
well,
yeah.
but and what,
Quarter of a
what-
century.
Yeah, and what they did was they changed it from where the counties paid for the public schools. So of course, the richer counties had the nicer schools, and the poorer counties didn't have anything. And after you know, we couldn't harvest any timber anymore, then you really had counties that were hurting. So their Measure 5 took and turned the funding of our schools over to the state, and so they could
Yeah.
gather all the money and spread it out amongst the counties. And then in '96, Measure 47 put a property tax limitation of 3%.
It was
Yeah.
kind of like a response to the Measure 5.
Yeah, but you know, folks' property. You know, I mean, we had folks moving into the state that had money that were driving up the prices of houses and all, and so property taxes were going up just phenomenal every year, and so they I think Bob McIntyre was behind that and got it limited to 3%, and they've been trying to do away with that ever since that, and a sales tax. So having lived in states that have a sales tax and no income tax, and having states that low property taxes just because the funds, you know, that are managed well, I just think
Yeah.
Oregon can do a lot better job at, you know,
Okay,
right.
that's one of the things that you have in mind. What about this Cover Oregon, Oracle? Can't believe all this stuff.
I can't either, and the more you look and the more you dig into it, I didn't bring notes on with me because it just is so
Right.
phenomenally
Phenomenal
absurd.
incompetence.
But and the same folks getting rehired, and you know, we'll probably end up having to pay back the federal government, you know, the $300 million that it
Well, they
loaned
can
us,
afford it.
and then each one's suing the other, and of course,
Yeah.
that's you know, the taxpayers will just end up paying for that. So it's something that wasn't thought through, and I think there was just too much trying to go into that website. I think it was more than just going there to find healthcare coverage.
Well, you think it was the fact that it wasn't thought through, or you think that they just got sold a bill of goods by Oracle?
No, I think it was Governor Kitzhaber. He got a special release from the federal government, and the acronym is FERPA, Federal. I forget what it stands for, but to merge the healthcare records along with school records.
Really?
And yeah, they were going to have, so say a child born today was going to have like 4,000 data points on them in this computer that followed them throughout, you know, through college. And so Oracle wasn't ready for that. They were ready for providing, you know, a gateway to choosing healthcare, and they weren't ready for all this other stuff that went with it, which they never really, you know, have explained. But that's you know, that's when you got the state's in charge of education. Actually, it's our governor Kitzhaber who's in charge of education. He's the czar of education. He's the czar of healthcare. He's the czar of transportation. So you know, I think if you have to look to anyone for anything that's failed or has cost overruns, you know, the buck has to stop somewhere. And
Or anything that's been successful as well, though, too. So
and that's I try to think to myself, successful to me means it's funded and it's running in the black, and I try to think of something that the state, some department the state has that is running in the black and is funded, and it may be me, but I can't come up with anything.
That's right. That's right.
I think of you know, they say PERS is only $16 billion in the red, but the actual estimates are more like $75 billion. You got TriMet, you know, in the red by billions, Metro, everywhere you look. And so how are we going to pay for that?
It's interesting because people I talk to that come to town, they think that we had a great public transportation system.
Oh, well,
But
we do, and
on the money end of it, it's
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I personally, living in Milwaukee, and I exclusively rode the bus for 8 years. I went to Portland State, and I lived downtown, and I used to go from Milwaukee to downtown, take some classes at Portland State, go out to Raleigh Hills, come back to downtown, back out to Milwaukee. I could get anywhere. I wouldn't have to walk more than a block or two and wait longer than 10 or 15 minutes. And you know, like, I get a lot of apathy in Clackamas County from the folks there because they fought that Milwaukee Light Rail so hard for so many years, and you know, and it's come right through town. And
it's taken so many years to build it too.
well, you know, but $1.5 billion. I mean, that you know, we could have, I think, free transportation in Portland for the rest of your lifetime with that kind of money, and that's just one little light rail that, you know, travels from Milwaukee to Portland State, which, you know, I took the bus forever now, and now I can't really catch a bus. There isn't one convenient. I have to drive to downtown Milwaukee, and
Okay.
so.
No.
Yeah, the public transportation is always an issue, and I know that light rail is some people say it's great, some people say it's terrible. I know some folks who came on a while back to talk about what do they want of that bridge, that new bridge to go across, and it's a complete different issue, but a lot of the same dynamics involved in that. You know, getting more traffic across the bridge or getting less traffic because you got the light rail. And I go out there occasionally and I see where they're building it, and you don't think that there's an advantage to having that, moving people back and forth from Portland to Milwaukee? I don't really know, since I don't live in either. I don't live
Right,
there.
and
I don't know
all I
what-
can tell you is I was gone for a while. I came back, and there's the I think the Orange Line, that goes from Clackamas Town Center to and connects to Max. It runs along 205.
Right.
And there wasn't a lot of pushback with that because since it runs along 205, it wasn't cutting through a lot of neighborhoods and towns
Right.
and all. But I know once that was built, the reason that they built the new Clackamas County Sheriff's Department right next to it was because they knew what was going to happen, and you know, crime just exploded in Clackamas County.
Because of the light rail?
Yeah, Clackamas.
Well, it's supposed to be really bad out Burnside. That's true.
Yeah, Max. I mean, you know, that I understand that whole experiment after the oil embargo in '74.
Okay.
You know, and
Something had to be done.
you know, and Jimmy Carter, you know, made Neil Goldschmidt the you know, Secretary of Transportation, and he got funding for it, and they, you know, and all, and so, but after they built that, and I don't think it, you know, things panned out the way they were supposed to, and that should have been like, say, okay, well, this isn't going to work for the kind of money that we're spending to build it and the money that we're spending to maintain it. You know, we can be running buses all over town.
And the ridership wasn't very high either, it seemed like to me.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we weren't ready for it yet. I think the one going out to Beaverton gets well used.
I
You know.
don't know.
At night, I see the one going from Hollywood out packed. Of course, that's right after work hours, what, 7, 8
Yeah.
o'clock. But still, there's a lot of people that use that train.
Yeah.
I know, because I'm on it.
You're on it, yeah.
Right.
Well, we've talked about a couple issues here. I would say that, you know, to my mind, that you're going into this as a reformer. You want to change things, and the Lord knows, not just Oregon, but every state, every municipality needs a little less corruption and a little bit of change. But is there any main issue or a main cluster of issues that you're involved with that you want to move forward if you get to Salem?
Of course, I mean, as a pharmacist and a long-term care pharmacist, we have these baby boomers that are you know, moving into where, you know, our parents are now. I know I'm at home as a full-time caregiver to my father. He's got Alzheimer's with 90
Oh,
years
yeah,
old, but
yeah.
a lot of folks aren't going to have that luxury, and so you know, that need 24-hour care. How are you going to pay for that? I mean, you know, we argue over paying for schools and you know, the basic essentials. What are we going to do when, you know, all these baby boomers need 24-hour care? And what I don't understand is you have 60 representatives, and I have to tell folks this all the time in small groups or at the door. You have 60 representatives, 30 senators, and then the governor or the attorney general and all can introduce bills. But you know, to make it nice round figure, you have 100 people that can introduce bills. So like this last session, we had over 5,000 bills introduced.
Really?
So, you know, that's 50 bills per legislator. And
Really?
and that's, it's like, you know, folks don't understand that, you know, that could be 5,000 new laws. And I don't see what 5,000 new laws are going to do anything for Oregon.
I'm just wondering.
But just even introduce a bill costs $1,300. I mean,
Just for the paperwork?
yeah, just to introduce.
Oh.
So, you know, 13 times 5,000, that's $6.5 million, and nothing's ever happened. And then you got to have hearings on them, and you know, in the committees and everything, and it comes out to where, you know, you want public input, and you're getting 2 hours notice, and you know, folks, you know, you can't. That isn't how government is supposed to work. You can't take and give somebody 2 hours notice to come down there with written testimony to give to each one of the members of a committee and to testify and all. I mean, most folks need time and planning and all, and they should really, like I said, you know, have it transparent and open and limit the number of bills and focus on the things that Oregon really needs to be taken care of first. And
That's right.
once we got folks back to work and we have some revenue coming in, then maybe they can start worrying about, you know, if you can smoke, you know, have a cigarette on the beach or not. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
you know.
Is that what one of those laws was about?
Well, that, you know, that's one they're thinking of. They passed the one, and it happened to be my opponent that passed it. I asked folks, you know, they say, are you a Democrat or Republican? And I said, well, I'm a Republican. And they said, well, I'm sorry, I only vote Democrat. And I said, well, then let me ask you this. Do you know who your representative is? And they don't. And I said, and do you know how long she's been down there? And they don't. So I said, so for the last 14 years, you don't know who your representative is or what she's been doing to you. And if you ask somebody who does know and you say, well, besides being just a rubber stamp for, you know, every, you know, Democrat agenda, what's her legacy? I mean, if you're down there 14 years, you should have something that you're really proud of. And for her, it was no smoking in buildings. Now,
okay.
I'm a non-smoker, so I don't have really an issue with that one way or the other. But where, you know, a lot of folks see that as a health issue, I see that as a property rights issue, because take Precision Cast Parts, which is in my district.
Right.
And so you got the guys that work a shift, you know, either, you know, 9 to 5 or the swing shift or something like that. You can't smoke while you're working. So they get off work, and what do they want to do? They want to go to this corner tavern, you know, that's now owned by the, you know, grandkids, you know, third generation tavern.
Really?
You know, to have a beer and a cigarette and talk over the day. And so, but here comes the state saying that no, you can't smoke in this tavern. You know, it's against the law now. And
That one makes it tough for me too, because I think the owner should make up their mind if he wants to lose customers because they don't want to be in a smoking establishment. That's up to him.
well, that's right. If a person doesn't want to be in a smoke-filled bar, don't go in.
That's right.
You know, I mean, but
Pretty simple.
but you know, but that became law. That, you know, had to, you know, be introduced and go through committee hearings and then finally get signed into law, and so nobody can smoke in any building. And then so what'd you do? You had people stepping outside to have a cigarette, and then what do you do with the butt, right? There's no place really, so they'd flick it on the street. So then she wanted to introduce another bill. I mean, we already have littering laws, but introduce another bill to where, you know, it was a more severe penalty if you littered with a cigarette butt out on the street instead of I don't know, a empty water bottle or something. You know, it's just the kind of things like have nothing to do with jobs or the economy.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
getting Oregonians back to work. Just more regulations and
So you would get Oregonians back to work primarily by reducing regulations then.
regulations, taxes, fees.
Fees are a problem.
Yeah, fees. I think the first bill that should be introduced is if a legislator wants to introduce a bill, they should have 3 laws that they introduce along with it to repeal 3 laws that are already on the books. And
Okay.
I think that one would cut down on the number of bills introduced, and second would start getting rid of you know, laws that we've had on the books that just make it confusing and complicated and
That's right.
you know.
Well, I don't see how that would work, but I could see that if you creatively wrote bills in such a way that it automatically rescinded 2 or 3 bills because of the creative effort to do something, would take care of some other things that were being done wrong,
Yeah.
would set them right, automatically rescinding those.
I've been told that, and I've thought about that, and the one that comes to mind, they said, well, what would you do away with if you had your ruthers? And I said, well, I think the first thing I'd do away with is the DEQ test stations for automobiles. I mean, 40 years ago when we were driving V8s, a lot of them belching out blue smoke, and we had the air inversions and all. I mean, a lot of folks.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah,
That's
a lot
something
of
to
folks-
think
Some of them
about.
gone now.
Well, you know, a lot of folks weren't here back then, but we had air inversions and we had poor air quality.
It
you
still
know.
happens, yeah.
Okay.
Well, it doesn't. Not really. When was the last time we had an advisory like
It's been a
Los,
while.
Los Angeles gets and everything, and that's because cars now are so efficient and so clean burning that it really makes the DEQ test stations obsolete. So,
That's right.
But it's big bucks.
you know,
Yeah.
well, I mean, you know,
I mean, for the government, it's big bucks.
well, yeah, and those folks have a job, but we have to, I think, start cost shifting. Like I said, the baby boomers are aging. We need to start gearing up for the things that we're going to need in 10, 20 years from now. So I'm not saying put those folks out of work. I'm just saying, you know, we need to start moving them into positions that we are going to be needing. And
Well, that's something to recognize. Is, you know, you implement a job program, you're going to end up taking somebody's jobs too, as they are reorganized.
well, that's why, you know, start
That's
training them now to move in there, and a lot of them are. I mean, I mostly see younger adults working those jobs, and there's so many things that our elderly population needs help with that they could do. I mean, you know, so even. I mean, anything, you know, you name it. You know, they're not driving anymore. They need transport back and forth to their doctor appointments. They need, you know, grocery shopping. They need.
Just about everything that they normally did themselves, they can't do anymore.
Right.
So,
And if they don't have family members helping them out, you know, they're stuck, shut-ins, homebound, and you know, I mean, nobody's checking on them. It's so.
yeah, I've had folks come on talking about the oncoming demise of the post office, and they're taking away a lot of services and different things, and redoing some of the routes. And like you mentioned, the elderly people, sometimes the only people they get to see or who can check on them is the post office.
Right.
You know, the postman that comes in and checks on them. That whole thing might be going away. So this dynamic of what you're wanting to change, you know, it is a state thing, but it is a national thing as well. You're really bucking a big trend here with the taxes and the fees and the growing bureaucracy. But you know, you choose to deal with it in Oregon rather than try to make it.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned,
can
you know,
s- I
the
can s-
federal, you know, that's federal post office, and I agree with you. I mean, I wouldn't do away with it. We need it. There's
You gotta have it. right?
yeah, but you know, I don't see the problem maybe cutting back to Monday through Friday. You know, no weekend delivery, or even maybe 4 days a week. You know, every other day, or there's all kinds of things. And instead of, what really annoys me is, you know, the stamps raising 2 cents at a time. You know, I mean, it really, you know, now I think 50 cents or 49 cents for a stamp. It's like, you know, and I know a raise is coming and it's going to be, you know, 2 cents or something. Let's make it 70 cents or whatever, and just call it good, and then
Give us
not
a
have
break
to,
for a while.
I'm
and
okay
not-
with the 2 cents.
you know, not have to worry about it, you know, for.
So there's so many issues, and I realize that you know, we can't cover them all tonight, but what I see as your main issue is trying to reform the government in such a way. I mean, they're, like I said, they're all gotten corrupt and bureaucratic and inept in a lot of ways, and getting back to, you know, what would be the first thing you would do once
that's
elected?
like I said, focus on the core issues that the government, that our state government needs to be taken care of. And you know, this, like I said, introducing 5,000 bills to cover all kinds of wacky legislation and regulations and everything. You know, let's take care of, you know, our real problems first. And once we got Oregon working and back in the black, and you know, making it job friendly.
Well, I can understand that you would want to do that, and you would go into Salem, and you wouldn't introduce frivolous bills. But how would you prevent other people from doing that?
Well, that's what I said. It's like the first bill that ought to be introduced is, for every bill you introduce, you need to repeal 3 laws that are.
You're probably right.
I
You're
think
probably
a lot
right.
of legislators would either think twice about introducing 50 bills, or they would, you know, they'd have 150 laws that are already on the books that they're ready to repeal.
Yeah.
And I think you know, a simpler Oregon statutes and laws and everything would just be better all the way around. Just
You know, I belong to a nonprofit. I'm on the board, and we have one rule, and it isn't my idea. It's a great idea. They said if anybody that comes up with an idea at the board meeting, they have to be the one to take charge of it and navigate it. So a lot of good ideas may not get put out there because of it, but we ain't overwhelmed by a bunch of ideas that nobody can do anything about because nobody wants to take charge of it. And that's somewhat in the same vein as what you're talking about.
right.
So it cuts down on the amount of ideas and makes it manageable.
Exactly. I think Oregon's approach is, let's introduce all these bills, and if we have to create another government agency to take care of them, we'll do it. Which is just, you know, folks, we don't have that much money anymore, so.
No, and then a lot of that comes to, like you say, that we don't have the sales tax, and it's been voted down, what, 9 times now? Would you
Right.
would you be voting for a sales tax if anybody ever brought it up?
Absolutely not. I can tell you, I'd much rather live in a state where we had a sales tax and no state income tax. I did far better in those states would be like, well, I think Washington. I'm not sure if Washington's one or not. Idaho, Florida, you know, state income tax and sales tax and no state income tax. And for me, that worked out far better. And with the family, you know, no tax on food. So if you eat all your meals at home, and you only pay tax on goods, you don't pay it on services. So you need your air conditioner fixed. You know, the part itself costs $300. You're paying tax on that, but you're not paying it on the $800 it takes a, you know, technician to put it in. But I did far better in that situation than paying, you know, 17% of my income right to the state. So.
Well, you lived other places, which gives you a little bit of perspective that perhaps a person that was born and raised here and didn't live anywhere else wouldn't have. And it's good to have that perspective. And you've lived and you've worked in the, well, I guess I can't say corporate world, but you've lived in and worked in business in different parts of the country. So you bring that experience as well. Have you gone for any public office other than this?
No. I just they asked me to, and you know, like city council or school board or whatnot. But what I know is what I'm running for is state representative, and what I learned from my experience as a long-term care pharmacist, providing all of the healthcare services to the state. You know, that's how I kind of got involved, and if I was still in House District 40, I wouldn't be running at all. But when they did gerrymander and they put me in the House District 41, the incumbent that was in that district was the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, which is why I decided to take and throw my hat into the ring. That, and she had never had anybody run against her, and it was my. It was my, you know, hometown. Not only hometown, but even in Portland, that's where my grandparents lived. My mom grew up in Westmoreland, went to Llewellyn Grade School and Cleveland High School.
yeah.
So that was my whole world, Milwaukee to Westmoreland, and so you know, I know it, and
Man, it's changed a lot.
yeah.
I want
Oh, we
to
got
talk
a
about
minute
his
and a half.
website. You can comment too. MC and then
McMenamin, and
Okay.
and if somebody goes on the
For-
internet, right?
FOR. Gonna be at that.
Well, that's my old website. I got a new innovative website
Okay.
that and it's real easy. It's timmcmenamin.com, and for folks that don't know how to spell McMenamin,
Okay.
that isn't tough. All you got to look around at
Okay.
mostly almost any
Spell it
corner,
different ways.
any part of town.
Okay.
You know. So, and you have to put the Tim in there before McMenamin, or you'll come up with a bunch of brew pubs.
That's right.
Yeah. So, but timmcmenamin.com, and the website gives a person the experience of being having a Facebook account or Twitter or Instagram. And without signing up for all that, we have tabs that I have all my posts on there. I have all my events listed. I have all of my endorsements, and soon coming, like I said, we're running on a shoestring budget, but soon will be pictures of every weekend and every event.
Okay, well, we want to thank you very much for coming on and talking with us. I want to thank the crew that makes this show possible. So thank you very much.